Hello everybody and welcome to today's Daf Yomi. Today's Daf is Shevout Daf 6 Amud B. And if it is so that Rabbi Akiva lists the different shades in decreasing order of their degrees of brightness, then after mentioning the reddish variation of Beheret, he should have next said the reddish variation of a wool white mark is darker than it, not that that the reddish version of lime is darker than it. They said in response to this, yes. Indeed, said that Rabbi Akiva continues by referring to the reddish variation of a white wool mark, and it is told likewise in a brighter that Rabbi Natan says, referring to that Mishnah, it is not correct that Rabbi Akiva said the reddish variation of lime is darker than it. Rather, he said that the reddish variation of a white wool mark is darker than it. The Gemara considers the source from which the different shades of marks are derived. And from where do we derive that Beheret is an intense white colour? Abai said the verse states, and if it is a white Beheret in Leviticus 13:4, which indicates that it alone is a bright white, and there is no other as white as it. The sages taught in a brighter, the bright shade of a Beheret makes it appear deeper. So what does that mean? Beheret amuka. A mark is regarded as richly impure only if it appears to be deeper than the surrounding skin, even though it is not actually recessed in the skin. The Ravid notes that the Seid appears to be raised above the surrounding skin. Rambam Sefer Tahara, Hilchatum Tzurat 1:6, see the Kesef Mishnah there. Than the surrounding skin, and so the verse states, and its appearance is deeper than the skin. In Leviticus 13:25. This is like the appearance of an area illuminated by the sun. So what does that mean? A precise reading of the verse describes the Beheret reveals that it is not actually recessed into the skin, but it appears as though it is. We'll explain that this phenomenon is achieved whenever something is brighter than its surroundings, and therefore follows that a Beheret is a brighter shade of white. Based on the same logic, it is apparent that a Seid is a darker shade, and therefore appears as though it protrudes above the skin. It should be noted that the Ramban in his commentary on the Torah, Leviticus 13:3, claims that in general something that is brighter than the surroundings does not appear to be recessed. This phenomenon occurs only when it is significantly brighter, as in the case of an intensely white Beheret. The foregoing, which assumes that all types of leprous marks are flush with the skin, is based on the opinion of the Rambam. The Ravid holds, based on his interpretation of the Gemara here, that the seid protrudes above the skin, which appears deeper than the area in the shade. The darker shade of a seid, says, makes it appear as though it is raised above the surrounding skin. This is indicated by the fact that the word seid means nothing other than raised. And so the verse states, upon all the high mountains and upon all the raised up, and it said hills in Isaiah 2:14. The words as Nisiot and Seid share the same Hebrew root and both refer to something raised up. In the verse, for a Seid and a Sapachat, Leviticus 14:56, the word Sapachat means nothing other than secondary, and so the verse states, and he will say, append me, Safahani, please, to one of the priestly classes to eat a piece of bread. 1 Samuel 2:36. This teaches that there is a leprous mark that is secondary appended to a seid. This is a mark that is the color of an egg membrane. We found a source for a mark that is secondary to a seid. From where do we derive that there is also a mark that is secondary to a Beheret? Rabbi Zera said white, Leviticus 13:10. Is stated with regard to seid, and white, Leviticus 13:4, is stated with regard to Beheret. The teaches that just as the shade of white stated with regard to a seid has a secondary mark, i.e. the mark that is the colour of an egg membrane, so too the shade of white stated with regard to a Beheret has a secondary mark, i.e. the lime-coloured mark. A different source for this was taught in a brighter. The verse, Leviticus 13:2, placed the word Sapachat between seid and Beheret to say to you, just as there is a shade that is secondary to a seid, so too there is a shade that is secondary to Beheret. The Mishnah Nagayim cited above states, the seid is like white wool. The Gemara asks, what is meant by white wool? Rav Bavai says, Rav Ashi says, is the colour of clean wool from a lamb that is wrapped up. Mechabnin. Some hold that kaban means to wrap, to tie around, and is used here to describe how the lamb would be wrapped up to prevent its wool from becoming soiled, and thereby preserve its pure, bright white colour in a cover when it is 1 day old, in order to protect it from being sullied, so that the wool would be suitable for producing a fine wool garment. In continuation of a statement cited above, Rabbi Chanina says, the following is an analogy to illustrate the opinion of the rabbis. The rabbis hold that despite the fact that a lime-coloured mark is a secondary mark of a beheret, being darker than it is in fact also darker than a seyed. The various analogies that the Gemara presents attempts to emphasize this point. The Baal HaMaor and the Rashba, who hold a seyed and a lime-coloured mark of equal brightness, have a version of the Gemara's text that states, and the king of this one is like the governor. See Muhammad Hashem. The opinion expressed in the Mishnah in the Gaon 1:1 that both a beheret and seyed have marks that are secondary to them. To what is this matter comparable? To 2 kings and to 2 governors. So what's the footnote? Aparche is governors, from the Greek aparchos, which means commander of the army or governor of a state, where with regard to their supremacy the king of this governor is above the king of that governor, and the governor of this king is above the governor of that king. The 2 kings are analogous to beheret and seyed, and their 2 governors are respectively a lime-coloured mark and an egg membrane-coloured mark. Accordingly, the order of supremacy is beheret, seyed, lime-coloured mark, egg membrane-coloured mark. The Gemara questions whether this is a suitable analogy for the opinion of the rabbis, but this analogy suggests that the shades are ordered, this one above this one and that one above that one, according to their degrees of brightness. That is Rabbi Akiva's opinion, not the opinion of the rabbis. Rather, a suitable analogy is where the king of this governor is above his own governor, and the king of that governor is above his own governor. So too, each secondary mark is subordinate only to its primary mark. The Gemara presents a different analogy. Rav Ada Ba'aba said, for example, a king, a chief officer, al-kafta, what's al-kafta? Derived from a pre-Sasanian Iranian word used for a high-ranking government official or inspector. Possibly it comes by way of the Greek, as it is similar to Greek agal pertes, which means commander or fort. The precise ranking of the various officials mentioned here is not known from early sources. Nevertheless, it would appear from this Gemara that the chief officer was directly subordinate to the king and was responsible for various governmental matters. The vizier had a higher ranking than the chief officer, although the latter was not subordinate to him, but to the king alone. The official position of the Persian Empire was apparently subordinate to the viceroy and not directly to the king. Accordingly, in terms of their ranking, they should be listed as king, vizier, chief officer, exalted. Rav Ada Ba'aba arranges them in 2 pairings to emphasize that the chief officer is subordinate to the king and not to the vizier, and as such provides an appropriate analogy for the relationship between the different shades of leprous marks. The vizier, Rofila, some suggest that this is derived from the Latin Rofulus, a tribune of the soldiers elected by the army. However, this is inappropriate in the context, and therefore others contend that the text should read Rotila from the Latin Rotulus, which refers to a king's viceroy. Each person in the list is more powerful than the subsequent one. Limor asks, but this analogy suggests that the shades are ordered, this one above that one, which is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rather, a suitable analogy is, for example, a king and the vizier, and a chief officer and the exalted. This list splits the 4 into 2 groups, each group containing one person who is subordinate to the other. The Gemara presents a different analogy. Rabbi said the previous suggestion is not precise because all these positions apart from the king are subordinate to the king. A more precise analogy would be, for example, King Shapur, the king of Persia, with his subordinate, and the Roman emperor with his subordinate. Rav Papa said to Rava, which of them is greater, King Shapur or the Roman emperor? Rava said to him, does he eat in the forest? I.e., do you live disconnected and unaware of events in the world at large? Go out and see whose coins circulate throughout the world. Tivya Daman Sagay. A comparison between the circulation of the coins of different empires can reveal their relative influence. Our Papa noted that throughout the world, Roman currency was more accepted commercially than the currency of the Persian Empire, thereby indicating that the Roman Empire itself was more prominent. In the period during which Rav Papa and Rava lived, The Roman Empire was still a world power that stretched over large parts of Europe, Asia Minor, Eretz Yisrael, and North Africa. The Persian Empire succeeded in staving off Rome's attempts to conquer it, and even won several battles, but it remained a medium-sized empire compared to Rome, which is an indicator of a government's influence, as it is written with regard to the fourth empire described in Daniel's dream of the future powers of the world. It shall devour the whole earth and tread upon it and break it into pieces. Daniel 7:23. And Rabbi Yochanan says, this is the guilty empire of Rome, whose coins circulate throughout the world. The Gemara presents a different analogy. Ravina said, for example, a new white woolen garment and a frayed one, and a new linen sheet and a frayed one. What does that mean? Tosfot note that elsewhere Rashi states that a worn garment is actually brighter than a new one. Therefore, they explain that the garments are not listed in terms of their brightness, but in terms of their importance, according to the opinion of the Ramban, who holds that the difference between the marks lies not only in their brightness, but also in their hue. There is no need to make such a claim. Even a worn garment is brighter than a new one. It certainly has less intensely white hue. The Mission 2a states, in cases of defiling the temple or sacrificial foods in which one had awareness at the beginning and awareness at the end, but had a lapse of awareness in between while he actually transgressed, this person is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. The sage is taught in the Baita, from where is it derived at the verse? This question is not an attempt to find a biblical source, as it is clear which verse are referring to the obligation to bring a sliding scale offering. The question is how it is known the verses should be interpreted to the point specifically to the defiling of the temple or sacrificial food. The verse states only that the person had become impure, but does not describe what he did after becoming impure. In general, it is clear that there is no prohibition per se for a non-priest to become impure, but there are various actions that are prohibited for a non-priest to do while he is in a state of impurity. Since the verses refer to the person being guilty, it is clear that they are discussing a case where he violated a prohibition, and the Gemara seeks to determine which prohibition is discussed. That describes liability for sliding scale offerings. The Leviticus 5:2-4 speaks of nothing other than the defiling of the temple or sacrificial foods. While the verse mentions that a violation was committed due to lapse of awareness of one's state of impurity, it does not mention which transgression was violated. The Gemara explains, and it is a logical inference. Since the Torah has explicitly prohibited and also prescribed punishment for the intentional defiling of something sacred, and has rendered one liable to bring an offering for the unwitting defiling of something sacred, it follows that just as when it prohibited and also prescribed punishment for the defiling of something sacred, it is prohibited and also prescribed punishment only for the intentional defiling of the temple or sacrificial food, so too when it rendered one liable to bring an offering for the defiling. The Torah does not explicitly state that one who defiles a temple or sacrificial foods is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. The sages learn this halach as a tradition of the Rambam Sefer Kabbalah Chicago 10:5 of something sacred. It rendered one liable to do so only for the unwitting defiling of the temple or sacrificial foods. The Gemara states, but say instead that the obligation to bring a sliding scale offering is referring to a ritually impure person who partook of the sacred portion of produce in Eretz Yisrael that is designated to be given to a priest, teruma. As the Torah has explicitly prohibited and prescribed punishment for this, one who partakes of teruma while ritually impure is liable to receive death at the hand of heaven. Leviticus 22:9. The Gemara answers, it cannot be referring to teruma because we do not find a sin whose punishment for an intentional violation is death, with regard to which one is liable to bring an offering for an unwitting violation. Sin offerings, of which the sliding scale offering is one type, are brought only for transgressions whose intentional violation is punishable by karet. The Gemara asks, but say this statement applies to a fixed sin offering, but one can bring a small scale offering for the unwitting violation of a transgression whose intentional violation is punishable by karet, just as in the case of violation for hearing the voice of Leviticus 5:1. That moves us on to the next Omen. Thank you for listening and wish you all the best. Bye.